All right, let's talk about finding something real in a world that's just obsessed with perfection.
It kicks off with this powerful idea. You scratch the surface, and what's underneath isn't real.
So that's the big problem, right? We're living in a world of perfect, shiny surfaces. I mean, just look at woodworking. The real craft is getting pushed aside for mass-produced perfection.
So we've basically traded all that natural character for sawdust and glue.
And online, what grabs your attention? It's not what's best, it's just what's brightest and shiniest.
And when you compare your own work to all that perfection, you can feel like you're falling short.
Which, for creators, can be a real trap, and the author learned this the hard way. See, he was dreaming of making it in the online woodworking world. A competition seemed like his big break.
The contest was straightforward, and the prize, a promise to get featured. That was the real hook.
So he went all out, building this incredible, transforming workbench. He thought, this has to get noticed. The result? Nothing. His project was never even shown. The promise was totally broken. It felt like a total rejection from the very community he was trying so hard to join. But that failure, it actually led him somewhere totally new, a completely different path. He found this whole other corner of the internet, unedited videos, raw conversations, the real deal. These creators weren't afraid to show their mistakes. They were showing a story that was still being written. And from this, he put together a totally different blueprint for how to be authentic online. It's all about showing your work, valuing experience, and telling a real story. It's a whole new mindset. Which brings us to the most important part, the power of the draft itself. You know, there's this great saying, if it looks straight, it is straight. Good is good enough.
And the author walks the walk. This entire book is published as a draft, mistakes and all. So it really makes you think, doesn't it? What's the real value in showing our own messy works in progress?
Okay, so let's dive into a guide for navigating this pretty uncertain world we're in. You know, it's a question a lot of us are facing, and the answer isn't always that clear. Because the real challenge isn't just one single event. It's preparing for, well, the unknown. A lot of us feel like the paths we were supposed to follow are just crumbling away. The writer C.R. Wiley really just nails our situation with this one observation. So get this, we're not lost in a physical jungle, but a wilderness of meaning. So when you're in this new territory, what's the most important first step you can take?
Well, to quote the great Douglas Adams, the first rule is super simple. Don't panic.
Right? Because panic never helps. To make a real plan, you got to find a place to rest first. And that brings us to the core idea here for survival. Tents before temples.
See, this isn't really about buildings. It's about a whole mindset of being adaptable.
I mean, think about it. According to the book of Exodus, even God lived in a tent. This just shows that true permanence isn't about big buildings, but about adaptable cultures. So how do you build your own metaphorical tent? Well, you're going to need a toolkit. The economist Thomas Sowell said it best. The real difference is just knowledge. Okay, so what if the best survival tool was actually plastic wrap? Sounds kind of weird, right? Well, that's because knowledge turns that simple roll of plastic into a waterproof shelter in minutes. And tradition, that's the package that passes all this crucial knowledge down to us. Take Dick Pronica. He survived 30 years alone in Alaska, using traditions he brought with him. Look, we can't just change the course of civilization all at once. It's just too big. But the beginning of a better world? It's actually way simpler than you might think. It's a really simple process. Assess where you are, clear a little space, and then build. So the only question left is, what's the first small, adaptable tent you're going to build? Okay, let's talk about the whole idea of an emergency bug-out bag. So picture this. You have just 1 hour to get out of your house. For good. What do you grab? And what's the reason you're leaving? A fire? A flood? Or something totally different? The what-ifs just pile up, right? It makes preparing feel kind of impossible. Even a simple choice like which car to take, well, it gets complicated fast. And what about your valuables? We're talking jewelry, documents, even your pets. The reality is you just can't plan for every single thing that could go wrong. And here's a crucial point. Having weapons won't help you against a flood or a fire. So if all your stuff can't actually save you, then what's the most important tool? Turns out it's whatever helps you get back into a functioning, working community. This quote flips the whole idea on its head. Use your stuff to make friends. So your real assets aren't things. They're generosity and your own kindness. It's how you help people remember, literally become part of the group again.
But relationships are fragile. They can have their own disasters too.
So is there one tool that can prepare us for those kinds of social dangers? Yep, it's forgiveness. Think of it like social duct tape, giving before the need is there.
When you let go before something is taken, you free yourself from all that junk.
So the real survival item isn't gear. It's a mindset. It goes in the bag first.
Kind of makes you rethink that first question, doesn't it? So what's the first thing to pack?
Welcome to The Explainer. We're decoding ancient symbols to find a framework for modern life. Okay, you've seen these everywhere, right? They get a big idea across without a single word.
These are symbols, little pictures for big ideas that pretty much everyone understands. Ancient texts, like the Bible, are just packed with these symbols, holding some timeless wisdom. So, how do we unlock what they mean? Well, let's start with a towel.
A towel isn't just a towel. It can be a blanket, a weapon, even a sail.
So here's the key. A symbol's meaning comes from its function in a specific context.
Now let's apply this idea to a complex passage about tents, homes, and clothing. And what's really interesting is how these symbols all point back to one thing, the human body.
Because, well, they all share one primary function: protection. But protection from what, exactly? It's not just physical stuff, but social and emotional exposure, too. And these ancient stories show that garments and tents protect us from both kinds of exposure.
This whole idea gives us a practical framework for meeting some really fundamental human needs. A parable, the sheep and the goats, actually gives us a checklist of essential actions. Here, the sheep act to meet these needs, but the goats don't, with huge consequences.
So the parable lays out these core human needs: hunger, thirst, nakedness, all of it.
This reveals a clear progression, a pattern. You start with clothes, then tents, then temples.
It's like a map, from basic survival all the way to a thriving civilization.
But get this pattern of building isn't a straight line. It's actually an upward spiral.
Yeah, an upward spiral. Each generation builds on the last, giving the next one a leg up.
Even the act of creation is described as preparing a safe place, stretching out the heavens like a tent.
Okay, so why does any of this matter to you now?
Well, we're all tasked with clearing our own little patch of wilderness to build and grow. By meeting needs for ourselves and for others, we build our own small piece of paradise. So, what piece of paradise will you build? The whole evolution debate can feel, well, stuck. But what if we're asking the wrong questions entirely?
You know this one, right? Ask it and the conversation can just stop cold.
So how do we actually move forward? Well, one source suggests a pretty fascinating way out. First, you've got to know the players. You have everyone from young Earth creationists to neo-Darwinists.
But here's the thing. The problem isn't the different views themselves. It's this tribal mindset. Everyone gets stuck in their own camp and nobody really talks. And really, this huge debate, it all comes down to 3 core sticking points. To bridge these gaps, the source offers a different way to think, starting with a big theological question.
Instead of creation from nothing, what if it was out of a person, out of Christ?
Philosopher Francis Schaeffer pointed this out. You can't start with nothing if it's actually something. The idea is called kenosis. It's this concept of divine self-emptying that becomes creation itself.
Okay, so this means a complex being is the source of all life. And this has a cool parallel in genetics. Think about it. The wolf has the genetic potential for every dog breed, from pugs to poodles.
So in this view, you start with complexity that creates variety. It totally flips the script.
And this doesn't just change the origin story, it changes the purpose of the whole thing.
Okay, so there was this old debunked theory that an embryo relives evolution as it grows.
But what if we reverse that idea? What if all of evolution is like one big life, just maturing?
This is reverse recapitulation theory. The idea is that all life is maturing together over time.
It suggests things like cooperation aren't just weakness, they're actually signs of evolutionary maturity.
So you see, what we believe about where we came from directly shapes where we're trying to go.
And this leads to a pretty wild final thought. What if evolution isn't about survival, but about joy?
Okay, let's dive into a surprisingly deep question, all starting with a simple, ancient riddle. You know the one, but what if the simple answer unlocks a much bigger idea?
Okay, so the simple answer is the chicken. But the real value is what each one symbolizes.
They represent two huge ideas, the agent and the arena. Let's break down what those mean. First up, the agent. Think of it as the actor, the creator, the one that makes things happen. And then there's the arena. It's the environment, the context. It holds and shapes the agent. So the agent acts within the arena, like a gladiator in the Colosseum, you know?
You see the contrast, right? The agent creates, but the arena determines the shape of that creation.
And this pattern isn't just for chickens. It scales up everywhere, creating complex systems from simple rules. It's like nested dolls. The nest is an arena for eggs, the coop for nests, and so on. We can even see this pattern on a cosmic scale, right in the Genesis creation story. First come the arenas, sky, sea, and land. Then they get filled with agents. Okay, so this relationship is everywhere, but what makes it a good one? It's all about purpose. Right, you can't judge something on its own. You have to look at it and its context. And that purpose has a name. The ancient Greeks called it telos, an ultimate aim or goal.
Telos is what determines the fitness between the agent and its arena, how well they work together.
This plays out in culture too. Let's look at two very different farms as an example.
So you have two arenas, each with a totally different purpose and totally different results.
You see how the purpose or telos of the factory farm changes everything? It's all about efficiency.
And this pattern scales all the way up. The purpose of our culture shapes us, the people inside. So when a culture treats beings like cogs in a machine, it eventually treats its people that way too. It makes you think, right? What's the purpose shaping the arenas of your world?
Ever wonder what makes a civilization last? Let's dive into the hidden forces that shape them. We start here with the ruins of a mighty empire, a powerful warning etched right into the stone. So, why did one vision crumble while the Statue of Liberty still stands? The answer is their telos. So, what's a telos? Well, it's a Greek word for your ultimate goal, your final purpose. But what drives that telos? What gives a whole nation its ultimate aim in the first place? The source calls this force a spirit. And no, not a ghost, but more like a collective vibe. Think about school spirit, right? That shared energy changes everyone's goal to fit one collective purpose. It's even in our language. We call alcohol spirits for a reason, because it changes you. Okay, so what happens when two opposing spirits try to run the same nation? Well, it comes down to a timeless idea. You just can't serve two masters. You have to choose. Abraham Lincoln saw this exact problem in America. A nation literally torn between two competing spirits. He knew these two spirits, slavery and liberty, just couldn't coexist. The nation had to pick its master. So why did liberty win? Because it aligned better with the nation's original founding telos. And that brings us right back to where we started, the enduring promise of the Statue of Liberty. See, her whole purpose wasn't about power or domination. It was actually the exact opposite. This enduring idea of liberty is connected to an even deeper, spiritual principle. It suggests liberty isn't just some political idea, but maybe something more, a spiritual outcome. Which leaves us with a pretty big question. What is our telos today? What are we aiming for? Let's explore a powerful idea that there are two totally different kinds of liberty. So the source kicks off with a puzzle. Why did two revolutions for liberty end so differently? In America, you have Lady Liberty. She's a figure of peace, a woman who frees slaves. But in France, their goddess of reason, well, she channeled a very different, provocative spirit. The author says this whole difference boils down to two ancient spirits, Liber and Libertas. Okay, first up is Liber. He's that masculine freedom to act. Think of it as agentic liberty. And then you've got Libertas. She's the feminine freedom of a safe space. This is arenic liberty. So here's the key difference. Liber is all about the action. Libertas, she's the arena for it. Now to really get this, the author uses a cool analogy, and it all starts with language. See, speech is just our breath, right? But it's shaped by our vocal tract. That's the arena. And get this, in Greek and Hebrew, the word for breath also means spirit. It connects everything. So the big idea is, just like breath gets shaped into speech, liberty spirit gets shaped by its arena. This brings us back to those two spirits. Masculine action can be chaotic, while feminine action is creative. The source uses this really powerful metaphor, a mother's womb as an arena, protecting the chaos inside. But you can have too much of a good thing. Edo Japan, for example, stifled individuals with too much arena. And the ultimate expression of libertas? It's that protective call to the huddled masses. So, this really gets to the heart of it. True liberty isn't a free for all, but serving the weak. And how do you build that arena? Well, the author says these are the tools you're going to need. But there's a warning here. Unchecked freedom to act actually becomes its own kind of slavery, which leaves us with one final big question. Of these two paths for liberty, which one are we on?
Let's explore a surprising plan for rebuilding community in our world today.
Yeah, a lot of us feel it, that sense of being disconnected, of losing community. Sociologists have a name for these lost spaces: third places. It's where community happens.
But what if the fix for this modern problem comes from one of history's oldest stories?
We're talking about the Exodus. You know, the story of how a new nation was formed.
When the Israelites left Egypt, it wasn't just about laws. They were given a whole new culture.
Think about it. The Torah offered a shared story, laws, and feasts that bound them together. And it wasn't just abstract. It was designed to be part of everyday life for generations. But there was a catch. The first generation couldn't adapt. They were too stuck in the past.
This created a tale of two generations, one stuck in the past, the other living the new culture.
Those 40 years weren't just a punishment. It was a deliberate, full-on cultural reset.
And this points to something really hopeful. Huge cultural change can happen in just one generation. Okay, so what does this ancient lesson mean for us and our own meaning crisis today?
Right now, we tend to focus on the extremes, changing just ourselves or changing the entire world. But the real opportunity, the sweet spot, is in that forgotten middle ground.
This is our local world. You know, our neighborhoods, town governments, schools, and local businesses.
And this is exactly where we can revive those all-important third places.
This is where strangers become neighbors, and then those neighbors actually become friends.
But now, a lot of these spots are just transactional, or they're divided by our beliefs.
And listen, a better career or more wealth, that's not going to solve the meaning crisis alone. Instead, a truly satisfying life seems to rest on these three key pillars.
So the big takeaway? We need to consciously build environments that actually encourage trust to grow.
So it leaves us with a question. What local third place can you help bring back?
All right, let's get into this powerful idea. How do systems, from empires to our own minds, survive? It really boils down to this core tension, the safety of what we know versus the chaos we don't. So let's start with this central metaphor, the city, which is all about order, versus the untamed wilderness. A city really thrives on that connection to the outside world, new people, new ideas, a healthy exchange. But that desire for stability, it can backfire, making us afraid of anything new or different. This fear kicks off a scary process. Protective walls slowly but surely turn into prison walls. So it's all about balance. A gate that won't open makes a prison. One that won't close, wilderness. So what's the solution to this self-made prison? Well, it takes a voice from the outside. It's a concept called the Lisan al-Gaib. Think of it as the voice from the outer world. And this happens everywhere. Even open systems like religions and science can end up closing their gates. But this isn't just about civilizations. This whole drama plays out right inside our own minds. Our brain's two halves are in a constant tug of war. One sees the whole picture, the other just sees sand. That left brain is great at simplifying things, but it can make us blind to the bigger truth. So the solution is something called opponent processing. It's how we learn from those who see things differently. And that requires an open doorway, a path for ideas to travel in both directions. Because as Francis Schaeffer said, what we think, well, that's going to determine exactly how we act. These core beliefs act like psychotechnologies, powerful mental tools that can build or destroy worlds. Without outside voices, our thinking just narrows until the one thing we forbid becomes our only path. So, here's the final question for you. Your beliefs form a city. Are its gates open or closed?
So you ever feel like the big systems are just broken? Let's explore how to actually create change. The source material really gets into this. It's about what happens when you try to speak truth to power.
Okay, first up, why do big institutions get so resistant to new ideas anyway?
It's called a closed system, basically a culture that punishes anyone who doesn't conform. And you see this everywhere, in universities, political parties, even huge church groups. So how do you change a system like that? Let's take a look at a pretty famous example.
Martin Luther, right? He was an insider. His high rank meant people had to listen.
But even he got kicked out. It just goes to show how tough changing from within really is.
So what's the cost of speaking out? What happens when you challenge the system?
Well, back in the day, martyrdom could actually make a message louder, like this famous quote says. But things are different now. The ways people get silenced have totally changed.
Today, it's not about being killed. It's about being ignored. That makes the old strategies useless.
So, if yelling at the system doesn't work, what does? Where are the real openings for change?
The key is to pivot. You've got to find the spots that are still flexible and open to ideas.
And that leads us to 3 huge opportunities for making a real impact. Let's break them down.
All right, first up, go local. Think about what you can do right in your own community. Think about it, small towns, local schools. They often need help and are open to new energy.
Here's a fantastic example of exactly that, straight from the source material.
One church took just $15,000
And used it to buy up millions in medical debt for just pennies on the dollar.
Then they just forgave it all, wiping out $3.3 million of debt for their neighbors.
Okay, second opportunity. Find what's been overlooked. See the value others have missed.
It's kind of like Moneyball, but for doing good, a concept you even see in ancient parables. And the third one, innovation. It's about using new tools to solve old problems creatively.
Which leaves us with one final big question. What if success wasn't about profit, but about community?
Ever wondered if a culture could just freeze in time? Well, let's dive in and see. It's a question that takes us to some of the most isolated communities on Earth, actually. Yeah, these static cultures are basically a form of time travel. They give us a peek into our own past. Let's start with the Samaritans. They've deliberately chosen to keep their ancient ways alive. So, for thousands of years, their traditions have barely changed. They're a living link to the past. So, how'd they pull it off? Simple, really. They just decided to resist all outside change. And this is a huge contrast to Rabbinic Judaism, which adapted to survive. The Samaritans, they did the opposite. But what happens when a culture gets so rigid it just can't change? Is there a point of no return? To find out, we're heading deep into the Amazon to meet a tribe called the Piraha. These guys basically challenge everything we think we know about language and culture. Okay, so their whole worldview boils down to one simple rule. If you can't see it, it's not real. Just try to imagine that. No past, no future. Only right here, right now. And their name for themselves literally means the straight ones. Everyone else were all crooked heads. So, this missionary, Daniel Everett, spent years learning their super complex language to share his faith. But when he finally told them about Jesus, they just weren't buying it. And for one simple reason. Remember their rule? He hadn't seen Jesus with his own eyes, so to them, his story was worthless. But here's the crazy part. The missionary was making the exact same mistake he accused them of. See, he wanted them to believe his unseen story, while totally dismissing what they could see. The whole tribe saw a spirit right there on the beach, but Everett couldn't see it, so he dismissed it. And that's the core of it, right? He ignored their direct evidence while offering none of his own. So the source here argues his whole approach was flawed from the jump for 3 big reasons. He probably should have started with a story they could actually relate to, like Genesis. But, this story isn't really just about the Piraha. It's kind of like holding up a mirror. Because here's the big takeaway. Any of us can become a crooked head if we just stop listening. It really makes you wonder, right? If a culture is blind to what it can't see, what are our blind spots?
All right, today we're tackling a fascinating concept from our source text called boomerality.
Here's how we're going to break down the author's argument. It's a pretty clear path.
So, what is boomerality? Basically, it's the West's main ethical code, born right after World War II. But to really get this code, we have to look at the new myth that created it. In this story, the war wasn't just a war. It was a straight-up battle of good versus evil.
And at the dead center of this myth, Hitler. He was basically cast as the ultimate evil. And you can see this myth everywhere, even in old Disney movies like Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
So, the key takeaway here is that good just became, well, the total opposite of Hitler.
This created a whole new moral playbook, and the number one rule, don't judge. Yeah, judging others became the absolute worst sin you could commit. Anything goes, right?
This idea even reshaped sexual ethics. Old taboos, suddenly, they were the evil thing.
So instead of repenting, the author argues, boomers just made excuses for their actions.
And this song, it perfectly captures that vibe. Just don't stop, don't look back.
Okay, so what happened next? This code had a huge impact on the next generations.
First up, Gen X. They reacted by swapping out all that good vibe stuff for pure irony.
Then came the millennials. Their boomer parents had kind of sorted things out by then.
But following that same advice in a totally new economy, it actually backfired on them. Which brings us to today. The author says all this has led us to a crossroads.
We can either keep reacting, or we can actually take a look at ourselves and repent.
The argument is that Hitler became a scapegoat, letting everyone else off the hook. And just like that, making excuses became a virtue, while admitting you're wrong became the real sin. So, the source leaves us with this big question. Is repentance the only way out of this cycle?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into why generations seem to clash so much. So why is there so much tension? Well, the text we're looking at has a framework for it. And that framework is called boomerality. It's pretty central to the whole argument, actually. What is it? Basically, a worldview built on innate human goodness and the blank slate theory. What's really interesting is how the author contrasts this with a more traditional biblical anthropology. But where did this worldview even come from? The text says we can't just blame the boomers. Turns out their parents, the silent generation, went through one major trauma after another. And that experience, the source argues, led to a pretty hands-off permissive parenting style. So what was the fallout? The author claims it had a huge impact, starting with sexuality. The author claims this view led to reinterpreting, well, everything, including religious texts. As an extreme example, the text points to the serpent seeds theory, a wild idea for sure. The text claims this polluted the dating pool, even leading to crashing global fertility rates. The author even points to a recent ad campaign that seemed to really misjudge young men's views. And to back this up, the source shows data on Trump gaining support among young voters. Okay, so the second big impact the text talks about is on politics and civic duty. It says a core belief became it's all rigged anyway, which became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And with citizens checking out, power shifted to unelected bureaucratic and academic elites. So after all that, what's the path forward? The source actually suggests reconciliation. But it's not simple. It requires both generations to re-engage, forgive, and repent for their part. A key idea for boomers is to learn to lead from your wounds, not just from your successes. The source shares this powerful story of a pastor who apologized for his generation's failures. And for younger generations, the author suggests a mindset of, Father, forgive them. Which leaves us with a final question. Can healing happen if one side doesn't lead from its wounds? Okay, let's talk about that feeling. Like you're speaking a totally different language than your parents or your kids. And you know, it's not just about music or clothes. It's about how we see our very selves. So let's break it down with 3 different ways of seeing the self, kind of like identity operating systems. First, you've got sincerity. This is all about social harmony. What you say should match what you feel. Then came authenticity. Here, the focus totally shifts inward to expressing your true self, right? And now, we're in the age of profilicity. Your identity is the profile you perform for everyone else. And check this out. You can actually map these identities to different generations, from sincerity to profilicity. So what's the big difference? Sincerity is about the listener. Authenticity is all about protecting the speaker. It's kind of like this. Elites used to act one way in public, but now it's almost flipped. So in a sincerity culture, you'd keep your commitments, even if you weren't feeling it. It built trust. But then, with authenticity, what you want to do started to matter more than your social role. Profilicity, well, that's a whole other level. The idea is there is no you behind the performance. It's all about seeing yourself through other people's eyes. Your identity is how you think they see you. And this gets criticized, right? People point to public figures and say, there's no stable self there. Okay, so how does all this identity stuff actually affect our communities? Let's get into it. Well, you have groups with hard boundaries, like a family. Then you have groups built around shared interests. You can think of it in layers, right? From the couple to the family out to the whole community. Back in a sincerity culture, these hard boundaries let you have a private, authentic self at home. This protected the family's public image. It's that whole staying together for the kids idea, which leaves us with a pretty big question. How did we get here? And what happens to the real you now? The way we see ourselves, it's changed a lot. Let's break down the three big eras of identity. So, who are you? Culture gives us three really different answers to that. Let's check them out. All right, this table lays it all out. We're talking sincerity, authenticity, and prophylicity. Those are the big three. So, first up, sincerity. This was all about your public reputation and knowing your role in society. You can totally see this clash in All in the Family. It's Archie versus Meathead, sincerity versus authenticity. In this culture, your word was your bond. So that older generation believed these new claims of authenticity. But then the baby boomers came along, and suddenly the focus flipped from the group to the individual. And this is where subcultures exploded, right? Using fashion and music to say, I'm not like you. But what happens when finding yourself just gets you lost? Well, that was the problem for Gen X. This line from Freaks and Geeks is perfect. She thinks a new style is a new self. So being popular wasn't cool anymore. To be authentic, you had to be on the fringe. And this all perfectly sets the stage for today, the age of prophylicity. Enter the internet. With prophylicity, identity isn't found, it's performed. There's no one real you behind the profile. This country song was a joke back then, but it's kind of just our reality now, isn't it? And here's the key, second order observation. It just means seeing yourself through other people's eyes. So now you're constantly curating your identity for these super niche online groups to get their approval. If our identity is scattered online, what actually holds us together? Turns out there's an order to things. And here's the big takeaway. Authenticity isn't the foundation. It has to be built on something else. Think about how we grow up. It starts with sincerity, trust, then authenticity, then prophylicity. It's a process. Sincerity is that basic trust that communication is safe. It's what lets a stable self even form. Which leaves us with a huge question for today. In a world of profiles, how do we build sincere connections? Let's explore a wild idea. What if looking for your true self is actually a trap? You know the drill, right? Look inside, find your true self, and just be you. But what if that real you isn't actually the hero of your own story? This is all part of what the source calls the culture of authenticity. And it has problems. It lets us make excuses, ignores our flaws, and, well, it can't actually give us meaning. To make this point, the author gets personal, talking about a struggle they just couldn't explain. And then, in 2024, an answer finally came through, an autism diagnosis. So what do you do with that? How do you make such a core truth part of who you are? This diagnosis really highlights two very different paths you could take. The author chose a different way, one inspired by their father's idea of radical sincerity. This leads to the idea of the helpless self, the part of you that knows what's right but can't do it. I mean, who hasn't felt that? That feeling of being totally at war with yourself. The solution offered here is theological. You surrender that helpless self to find your true identity. It's a process of adoption and reshaping, letting an outside source redefine who you are. This is all about a return to sincerity. It's not about your inner feelings, but your chosen commitments. The author calls this being sincerely inauthentic. It's like a sincere role play. You never break character. You're putting on an identity. Through practice, it becomes real, and Christ is the profile you adopt. So it leaves us with a huge question. Is real identity found by looking in or looking out?
All right, let's jump into a pretty provocative idea from our source material today. It proposes that our digital age is basically just a high-tech reboot of the ancient world. So, our algorithmic feeds, they're the new oracles, shaping what we believe,
buy, and even become. But to really get it, we've got to take a quick look at how gods actually worked back then. See, their gods weren't distant. They were superpowered versions of very human hopes and fears.
And this is where it gets really interesting, mapping these old archetypes onto our world. First up, you've got Zeus, the big boss, the one who made all the rules for everyone else. Today, that's the whole system, governments and big tech controlling global trade and information. Next, let's talk about Ares, the god of war, representing all things traditionally masculine.
You see this archetype today in the manosphere, from fitness influencers to action heroes.
And then, of course, there's Aphrodite. The source says her influence on our culture is massive.
I mean, check out this quote. It uses modern slang to show these dynamics are nothing new.
This has built huge economies, makeup, fashion, social media, all centered on desire and image. But there was a counterpoint to Aphrodite, Artemis, the goddess of total self-sufficiency. She was basically the original blueprint for freedom, for not depending on anyone else. Sound familiar? So this created a whole different path to power, one totally separate from that dynamic of desire.
And these competing cults weren't just about culture. They were huge economic engines, just like today.
Let's look at a case study, Ephesus. It shows what happens when belief clashes with money.
Her temple there wasn't just a building. It was a massive, profitable industry built on selling magic.
When new converts burned their magic books, we're talking 50,000 silver coins. That's a day's wage each.
So when a new belief system threatened their jobs, the people whose livelihoods were on the line rioted.
So what's the big takeaway? Well, this ancient lens is actually a great way to decode our world.
Our online echo chambers are the new city-states, and our digital tribes are the new cults.
It really leaves you with one question. If your feed is your temple, who are you worshiping?
Hey there. Today, we're looking at our modern economic mess, but through a totally different ancient lens. You've seen those videos, right? Shoppers fighting over stuff? Well, someone's making a lot of money from it. And it's not just Stanley Cups. This kind of consumer craze isn't new. It's actually a symptom. So here's what we're going to cover. We'll dig into the root cause and maybe find a simpler way out. First up, misplaced faith. The idea here is that big top-down political fixes, they just don't work. See, top-down control can't fix what's wrong in our hearts. The real problem is what we want. Which leads to a wild idea. What if all economics is actually faith-based? And by faith, or pistis in Greek, we don't just mean religion. We're talking about trust, allegiance. A great example is the story of Joseph in Egypt. His whole plan? It ran entirely on trust. It all came down to one thing. Pharaoh had to have faith in Joseph's plan. That trust saved everyone. But what happens when we put our faith in the wrong thing? Well, that's where idolatry comes in. And no, we're not just talking about golden statues. It's about trusting things that are bound to let us down. So you have true faith based on evidence versus blind trust in things like material success. Big difference. Think about your smartphone. Is it just a tool, or has it become something more? An idol? Okay, let's jump back to antiquity. The Greco-Roman world gives us a powerful and kind of scary mirror. Wow. This quote from Demosthenes shows a society where people were just transactions, tools for a specific purpose. Their economy was basically a temple industrial complex. It preyed on people's hopes to make a profit. And the results were brutal. Widespread slavery, abandoned children, people just became slaves to their own desires. Their top two values? Personal peace and getting rich. Basically, don't bother me and I want more stuff. So if these big systems fail, ancient and modern, what's the alternative? What do we build instead? Well, the early apostles didn't try to fix the whole system. They started small, from the bottom up. The solution proposed is actually super simple. Not a huge plan, but something small, something human. So that leaves us with one last really big question to think about for our own lives. Today, let's trace the story of silver. It's a metal that's had a powerful grip on us for millennia. So what connects ancient idols to your phone? It's all about one element and our obsession with shiny things. It all starts with that dream of getting rich quick, right? Think Aladdin's lamp or striking it rich. That dream is often sparked by the simple appeal of glitter. But why do we love it so much? Well, it's because silver is the most reflective metal on Earth. Before it was money, that shine was everything. Take the ancient city of Ephesus. Its whole economy was built on glitter, making silver shrines for the goddess Artemis. So when the Apostle Paul threatened their business, you saw just how tied together religion and money really were. But the power of an image was also political. In the Roman Empire, the emperor's face was the most famous. His face was stamped on a silver coin, the denarius. And that very coin became part of a famous challenge to Jesus. And Jesus' answer drew a sharp line, right? There's Caesar's image on the coin and God's image on people. You know, the way they made coins was a metaphor. Soft silver was literally forced to conform to Caesar's image. And this idea went way beyond coins. Roman legions were trained to conform, becoming perfect, interchangeable soldiers. Okay, but silver has another key property. It's reflectivity. It's what allowed us to actually see ourselves. This power to see ourselves so clearly is captured in the myth of Narcissus, a timeless warning. Over the centuries, silver's reflectivity drove huge changes in technology, from mirrors right up to the silver screen. But in our time, a third property of silver is now the most important one. It's not about its looks. It's all about conductivity. Silver is actually the most conductive metal on Earth, a total game changer for tech. So that same element that made idols and mirrors, it now powers our smartphones, especially those glowing screens. So, after all this, from ancient gods to Caesar to our own faces, whose image is now in our hands? Let's talk about one of the biggest ideas about money and how we might have it all wrong. You've heard this a million times, right? It has shaped how we think about economics for centuries. But what if this whole time it's just been a simple mistranslation? See, the original Greek uses a super specific word, philargyria, and it was meant as a precise warning. It's not about money. The real warning was about covetousness, wanting what isn't yours. So let's be clear, money itself isn't evil. It's just a tool that's evolved over time. I mean, we went from salt, yep, that's where salary comes from, to gold, and then to paper. And now it's basically just digital numbers in a global system that runs on debt. So if money isn't the problem, what's really driving all that destructive behavior we see? Well, the answer might be something called mimetic desire. The philosopher René Girard said, "We don't really know what to want. We just copy other people." The easiest way to get this is to think about kids. Imagine a room packed with toys. One kid grabs a toy, and suddenly that's the only one the other kid wants to play with. And that's it right there. That powerful impulse to imitate desire is basically covetousness. The wild thing is, this desire engine is what powers our entire modern economy. It pushes us to chase jobs for status, rack up huge debt, and move to crazy expensive cities. You can really see this play out when you look at the actual numbers. Check this out. A bigger paycheck in one city can actually leave you with less money at the end of the day. Our system is obsessed with putting a price on everything, but it's not so good at seeing true value. So where does all this end up? Well, it's leading to a pretty controversial vision for the future. You've probably seen this line from the World Economic Forum. It definitely got people talking. It's the end goal of a circular economy, where everything becomes a service and you rent, not own. Which leads us with a huge question. When everything has a price, what has real value?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into how market forces might actually be shaping our values. All right, let's jump right in. The whole argument really boils down to this one question. So the basic idea is this. Incentives have a huge impact on how we act, intended or not. Just think about welfare or drug laws. Good intentions, right? But sometimes they can backfire. But then, things got supercharged. A huge philosophical shift around sex changed everything. It all started back in the 18th century with ideas about breaking society's moral chains. And that led to a pretty radical idea. The only limit is what you can physically do. So what happened? A huge, untapped market opened up with almost no rules. Okay, now let's talk advertising. It stopped being about the product and more about the lifestyle. The new goal was to sell a dream, and they often used sex appeal to get you hooked. And slowly, that line between art and what's obscene got really, really blurry over time. I mean, the legal standard became, I know it when I see it. Not exactly a firm line.
The result? Kids started seeing a lot more adult stuff in ads, on TV, pretty much everywhere.
And that's when this whole strategy of creating desire was aimed right at children.
So cartoons, for families, they basically became marketing machines for children.
A show like He-Man wasn't just a story. It was a 30-minute commercial for toys.
And the marketing split right down the middle, selling action to boys and lifestyle fantasies to girls.
These two different paths were setting up young men and women for something entirely new.
And then came the internet, where all that desire met a limitless, unregulated supply.
The explosion from that collision, that's the huge online sex industry we have now.
So with all this easy gratification, you have to wonder, what was the trade-off?
The argument is that we traded things like community and family for consumerism and fantasy.
And this trade makes it way harder to form real relationships and build a legacy.
So it all comes down to one final question. What is the true cost of our desires?
So, can crypto be more than just money? Let's explore if it could actually make us better people. First up, a pretty big question. Is the money in your pocket fundamentally broken? The argument is that inflation and government control are creating a system that just isn't working for us. And the solution a lot of folks point to? Bitcoin. So let's break down what that actually is. It's basically digital cash secured by code, and every single transaction is public on the blockchain. Its value is tied to real-world energy spent to mine it. That's what we call proof of work. And here's a key feature, a hard cap. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, period. But not all crypto is the same. Bitcoin is kind of in a league of its own. Some argue only Bitcoin is truly decentralized. They believe it's the only real fix for fiat currency. Which brings us to a deeper question. Can a bunch of code really fix human nature? I mean, it's useless unless people actually choose to use it. It all comes down to trust. Some fans get carried away, a bit like the folks who called the Titanic unsinkable. It's a warning. The point is, code can't fix character. You can't program a society to just trust itself. Okay, so this leads to a pretty wild idea. What if money could nudge us to be better? Imagine real estate bucks. It grows when you save for a house, but shrinks on vice spending. Or how about health bucks? You'd get a discount on healthy food, but it taxed the junk. Then there's vice bucks. This is what you'd have to use for things like alcohol or tobacco. The goal is using economics to guide choices, not just banning things. This could even curb black markets. So it's all about making good habits easy and destructive habits, well, really expensive. Look, no system is perfect, but it leaves us with this big question. Should our money guide our morals? Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful ancient idea about how wealth is actually built. So what on earth does an ancient ox have to do with your job today? Let's find out. Okay, to really get this, we've got to go back to an ancient definition of property. And it actually comes from the 10 Commandments. The law against coveting defines what you can truly own. It's really cool. It breaks down property by its function, from just shelter to actual tools. And this leads us to the key idea here. Not all property is the same. Think about it. A house stores value, sure, but a field? That's an engine for growth. This is productive property, stuff that generates more value, like tools or a business. Back then, animals were the perfect example, a living, breathing, growing investment. Pretty smart, right? Even their laws got it. Stealing a productive ox costs you way more than just a sheep. And this cycle of reinvesting your surplus, that's the secret sauce for all economic growth. Okay, so how does this old school wisdom stack up against our modern world of debt? Well, an ancient proverb really nails the power dynamic that debt creates, even today. I mean, our whole economy normalizes debt, and it can trap you in a cycle of payments. You see, the risk has basically been shifted entirely from the lender over to the borrower. So what's the alternative? It's all about investing in increase, not just buying more stuff. The big idea is to work for growth, not just out of fear of losing what you have. When you invest wisely, you're not just growing wealth, you're helping others become productive too. See, that's how you build more than just wealth. You build a lasting community. So this leaves us with one big question. What in your life is truly productive? Let's dive into this fascinating idea of viral concepts versus fading cures for society's problems. You know how things go viral, right? Well, what if that same logic applies to our society's health? It feels like our big efforts to stop crises, from pandemics to misinformation, just aren't working. And a huge side effect of all this, our trust in major institutions is just collapsing. It's kind of like taking a weak antibiotic. It can't fight the infection, leaving us vulnerable. When you can't tell what's true anymore, it just fuels a whole lot of fear and apathy. This all brings to mind a timeless warning: a house divided against itself cannot stand. So picture this: an old Roman bridge that's now supposed to hold up a massive modern truck. The big fear is that our structures just weren't built for today's pressure. They're bound to break. Okay, so if top down control isn't the answer, then what is? The idea is to stop trying to fix the big kingdom and start rebuilding from the household up. This really goes back to that classic story of the two builders and where they built their houses. See, we've inherited this house that has a great foundation, but we've completely stopped maintaining it. The point is, these cracks in society stop spreading when they finally hit something solid and whole. So, what's the strongest mortar to fix this? The source calls it self-sacrificial love. Now, get this right. It's not the weak sacrificing for the strong. It's the exact opposite. This is a pretty stark contrast to other views, like the Marxist vision of forced sacrifice. The text points to this quote as the ultimate example of that kind of selfless love. And this exact message, aimed at the oppressed, became the original viral idea. Its core truth just cut through everything: culture, language, you name it, and helped people thrive. But somewhere along the line, the virality of that original message seems to have just vanished. It's like we've been busy giving the house a new coat of paint while letting the foundation rot. The argument is that society has almost become immune to the very thing that could cure it. So the challenge is to rediscover the authentic core of what made this idea go viral in the first place. Which really leaves us with one final thought. In a world this divided, what makes an idea truly bring us together?
All right, let's get right into it. We're breaking down a pretty sharp critique of modern life today. So, here's what's on the table. We're kicking things off with how a key religious idea has totally shifted. It all starts with the Great Commission. Jesus' final words to his remaining disciples. But the argument here is that its meaning got flattened. We're just scratching the surface now.
And that's the big switch, right? From deep personal mentorship to just numbers and politics.
This master-apprentice thing, it was the OG way of learning. Hands-on, real skills, a direct relationship. Think about it. Farming, building, raising a family. This is how people learned how to live. Then, bam, we outsourced learning to schools. Suddenly, it was all about books, not hands-on work.
And the church did the same thing. You end up with leaders who are more book smart than life smart.
The result? Pastors who can't fix a leaky roof or really connect with working-class folks.
Okay, so this isn't just about the church. This happens to pretty much any big institution. From factories to faiths, things can get stale, losing that original spark and flexibility. Now contrast that with this idea. If you don't work, you don't eat. Super simple, super real. So much of our work now is just pixels on a screen. We've lost that feeling of making something. Which raises a huge question. How do you find meaning when your job is just improving a KPI?
And this mindset has totally infected our personal lives. It's like we have an impossible checklist.
So with all these pressures, you have to ask, what actually makes the cut and what gets tossed? For a lot of people, faith just becomes one more thing to cram in, another box to check. But maybe the problem isn't spiritual at all. Maybe we've just forgotten how to be human. So here's a final thought. What if getting our hands dirty is how we find ourselves again?
Okay, let's dive into an idea that links ancient traditions to a modern crisis for young men. First, we'll see why people are looking to the past. Then, we'll get to a new plan. So, why are people looking back? Well, there's this real pull towards traditional forms of Christianity. Think monastic orders or communities like the Amish. They put faith right at the center of life. But here's the catch. These traditions come with big trade-offs, focusing on one thing over others. So, what's the real problem here? The author points to something much deeper. It's called idolatry. But think of it this way: making a small thing the main thing. Basically, it's when you confuse a good thing from the creator with the creator himself. And this problem? It's hitting one group especially hard: young men. Just look at college grads. The gap between women and men is wide, and it's growing. And get this, 40% of kids are born to unmarried parents. That number's climbing. Of those children, a shocking 80% are raised without a father in the home. The result? Generations of boys are growing up without a model for how to be a man. Okay, so what's the plan? How do we actually address this? It's a three-step plan: find a calling, revitalize the church, and encourage fatherhood. The goal here is way bigger than just behavior. It's about putting life back together again. And the foundation for this, well, it goes way, way back, all the way to the beginning. In Genesis, you see humanity's first three duties: to work, build community, and multiply. And this wasn't just a one-off command. It's a pattern you see again and again. Even in exile, the prophet Jeremiah told the people the same thing: build, plant, and marry. You see it in all the big names, from Adam the gardener to David the king. Okay, but let's be real. How does a plan like this actually start in our messy world? Well, here's the hopeful part. Imperfect people with imperfect tools are not a problem for God. So this isn't about building a perfect utopia. It's about fixing the communities we already have. Which leaves us with a pretty big question. What's your role in building and rebuilding today?
Welcome to The Explainer. We're connecting the ancient art of translation to a very modern crisis of purpose.
All right, so let's break this down. The source points to a purpose crisis, which is different from a meaning crisis.
So one group feels kind of tricked, while the other feels like they were never even invited to the game.
When that clear path is gone, some look for belonging in, well, some pretty destructive places.
So what's at the root of all this? Well, the argument is that our language itself is failing us. It's this concept called sacralization. Basically, when words get so rigid, they lose their power to connect with people. Once powerful words just become empty jargon. To the modern ear, it just sounds like, well, gobbledygook. The big idea here is that meaning has to be actively translated, not just passively repeated.
And this really gets to the heart of it. We're talking about a true living translation of meaning. You know, historically, this isn't a new idea. The message always spread through constant active translation.
The whole point has always been getting the core message across, no matter the culture or the language.
I mean, Jesus himself was a master translator using everyday stories, not that rigid, sacralized language.
Okay, so that brings us back to today. How can this ancient idea actually solve this modern purpose crisis? The solution offered is to build a new path, focusing on the absolute foundations of a good life.
It's a two-part approach, combining practical, hands-on training with a real spiritual foundation. And they focus on the building trades, jobs where you see tangible, measurable results every single day. But here's the really clever part. It's all about connecting the work you do with your hands to a deeper meaning. So by literally building a foundation, the spiritual idea of a foundation suddenly makes sense. That's translation in action.
So you have to wonder, maybe the solution isn't something new, but just a new translation for an ancient message.
Today, we're looking at a blueprint for life that goes way beyond just your career. So, is a successful career really enough? This argument says maybe not. It points to a huge crisis, an epidemic of fatherlessness, leaving young men without guidance. So here's the game plan. We'll look at work, marriage, fatherhood, and what it all means. First up, the argument says the whole university to office pipeline isn't the only way. Instead, it points to skilled trades, a way to build practical skills and real character. In the trades, you get mentors who can pass on wisdom, kind of like fathers would have. And hey, a huge plus, you can build a great career, completely debt-free. Okay, next step. We need to totally reframe what we think marriage is all about. It's not just about romance. It's about building something together, like a business partnership. The idea is your success in life literally grows exponentially inside a solid relationship. And this mindset flips how we see kids too, not as a cost, but a gain. You know, a large family used to be a sign of a prosperous family, more help, more wealth. So this all sounds pretty personal, right? Well, it ties into some huge societal problems. Think about all these issues we face: homelessness, poverty, dropouts, the list goes on. But what if there's one single solution to all of it? According to this, It's fathers. Yeah, intentional fatherhood is presented as the absolute key to raising responsible adults. The idea is that while moms nurture, you need fathers to build strong men and women. Finally, let's zoom out. All these earthly relationships point to something even bigger. As this quote suggests, to know yourself, you first have to know where you come from. The argument is simple. How can we get the idea of a heavenly father without an earthly one? So, having a mentor, having a father, that becomes a tangible model for the divine. I mean, look at Jesus. The Bible calls him a carpenter, a trade he learned from his dad, Joseph. So there you have it. Vocation, marriage, and fatherhood, an entire blueprint for life. Which leaves us with this question. Could this blueprint be the key to a more fulfilled society? On The Explainer today, we're breaking down a blueprint that brings faith, work, and community together. So let's dive into a model that tackles this very question, what some call a modern crisis of purpose. A lot of people feel like life's split into different boxes, lacking that one connected meaning. So what's the fix? Well, it's a program designed to make our work feel truly meaningful through faith. Okay, so how does it actually work? It's built on two learning tracks that run side by side. First up, students get hands-on training from Christian business owners and contractors right in the trades. And at the same time, they're diving deep into Bible study, with local pastors leading the way. The whole initial program runs for about 9 or 10 months. Think of it as a super productive gap year. The goal here is to give them skills that are just plain useful for life, whatever career they choose. And there's a really clear path for growth, from apprentice to journeyman and then on to master. Now, what's really interesting is how this mirrors a student's spiritual journey in their community. But this model isn't some rigid structure. It's actually a super flexible blueprint. I mean, you could scale it down into a book or way up into a full-time K-12 school. Community is absolutely key here, with local churches providing that crucial support and mentorship network. Okay, let's switch gears to the practical side. How does a program like this actually pay for itself? Well, it can run like a business, selling goods, taking on renovation jobs, or even flipping houses. So the ultimate goal is to bring all those splintered pieces of life back together again. This model gives us one blueprint, and it kind of makes you think, how could you apply this idea yourself? Okay, let's dive right in. Ever wonder why we're still so obsessed with fantasy stories? It's not just about escaping. These worlds are actually a mirror for understanding ourselves. So you've got fantasy and sci-fi. They look different, but they're really two sides of the same coin. These fictional races, they're just simplified versions of our own complex human nature. J.R.R. Tolkien was a master at this. He built what's called the Tolkien Bridge. See, by making it all fiction, he totally disarmed our modern skepticism. Let the big ideas sink in. But here's the thing. Is looking to the past really enough for the challenges we face today? Right, even George R.R. Martin pointed out, Tolkien's world kind of skips the messy parts of governing. And that's the real danger here, right? This nostalgia for a simple past can become a trap. So if Tolkien connects us to the past, which story can give us a model for the future? Well, the argument is that Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time is that next step, an evolution. The big difference? It's a shift from just being good to being culturally competent. In Jordan's world, characters don't just win because they're good, they win because they're capable. A perfect example of this is a guy named Matt Cawthon. He literally beats master swordsmen with a quarterstaff, a simple farming tool he grew up with. And then there's Perrin Ibarra. His skill as a blacksmith comes directly from his community. It just goes to show a culture that truly values and passes on real-world skill. So what's the secret sauce? Investing your best resources into your kids. That's the source of competency. So unlike the classic orphan trope, these heroes come from healthy families and strong communities. This foundation lets them adapt and solve new problems. Their skills aren't static. So why read these huge epic stories? It's way more than just for fun. Think of them like blueprints, prototypes you can use to navigate your own life. Which brings us to the call to action. It's about moving from reader to writer in your own life. The real goal is to plant the seeds of a story, not just consume it for entertainment. So, if stories really are prototypes for living, what story are you helping to write?
Hey, what's up, everyone? Ever wonder what makes a story really stick with you?
What if I told you the secret is hidden inside a forgotten video game?
So, our story kicks off in the 90s with shareware games on a family PC.
A magazine disc had a full fantasy game on it, Betrayal at Krondor.
The gameplay was kind of clunky, but man, the story was totally gripping.
And the name on the screen, Raymond E. Feist, led to an actual book, Magician.
In it, we meet Puck, an orphan boy who's suddenly in some serious trouble.
And this gets to the heart of it all. This one simple piece of advice.
See, this reveals a choice every author makes. Are you a discoverer or a perfectionist?
That choice has huge consequences. Just look at the difference in output here.
For fans of the perfectionist approach, it's meant an almost 14-year wait for a book. So what makes a story flow so well?
The answer might actually be natural.
Think about how rivers or lightning branch out. Stories work the exact same way. You have an event, then a critical choice, and the story just branches from there.
So authors are basically explorers, navigating this landscape of cause and effect.
Okay, but here's the twist. Is Feist's writing, actually good? Critics point out a lot of flaws. Tropes, simple prose, too perfect characters. But Feist himself gives the answer. He calls himself a craftsman, not an artist.
It's a totally different mindset. Instead of chasing genius, just master the fundamentals. And because his fundamentals were so solid, his books were a perfect entry point.
You could swap Feist with Harry Potter or Narnia. It's about that first foundational story.
It really makes you wonder, why do we sometimes look down on those simple beginnings?
Because the simple truths we learn from them stick with us. They're our foundation.
So, I'll leave you with this. What were the simple stories that built you? Okay, so let's dig into this. What exactly is it that makes a story feel real?
Have you ever felt like a fictional story was actually more true than, real life?
For a perfect example, let's talk Star Wars. For years, the story went on in official books.
But then, boom, new movies came out, and suddenly all those stories were declared fake, unreal.
Fans were furious. I mean, how can something that felt so real just get erased? Believe it or not, this fan debate taps right into a super old philosophical question. What is real?
It's a showdown between realism, that stuff is actually real, and nominalism, where it's all a cultural construct.
Nominalism comes from the Latin for name, kind of like being a fan in name only. See, the most powerful stories feel true because they plug into a deeper pattern of how the world works. Think about Tolkien. He built entire languages. Compared to that, Star Wars kind of felt like a cardboard cutout.
Tolkien's world had a story about its own story. It just feels so much more lived in, right?
And this tension, it isn't just in fiction. It has literally shaped the course of Western history.
Our worldview evolved from a universe with divine purpose to a machine to something purely subjective.
Modernism's scientific promise led to nihilism, so postmodernism just rejected all the big stories.
So, if we can't agree on one big story anymore, how do we even find common ground?
Well, a classic Star Trek episode actually offers a pretty amazing solution to this whole problem. The translator fails because these aliens, the Temerians, speak only through metaphors from their myths.
Their captain keeps saying stuff like this, but to Picard, it's just gibberish he doesn't understand.
So what does the alien captain do? He beams them both down to a planet to face a monster together. He's creating a new myth in real time, one they both now understand because they lived it. And that's the key. We build a shared reality by telling and living out stories with each other. So that leaves us with one crucial question. What story are you helping to write?
Today, we're exploring a powerful idea about stories, value, and what truly matters.
You've heard this famous line, right? Shakespeare is basically saying that names are just labels. So for Juliet, the name Montague didn't matter. It was Romeo's essence, who he was that she loved. And that's exactly why an adaptation like West Side Story totally works. The names change, but the core story stays. This gets us to a huge debate, especially when turning beloved books into movies. You hear it all the time. The book was way better. But is being perfectly faithful really the point? The idea here is that a good adaptation nails the story's essence, its spirit, even if details change. When a whole culture prioritizes labels over essence, things can get, well, confusing. It creates a narrative fog.
C.S. Lewis actually warned about this. We think we're saying something important, but we're just talking about feelings.
Okay, check this out. Look how similar these two passages are. The words are practically identical. But here's the twist. One's about a beloved, the other's a warning. The context, the essence, changes everything. So if you just reduce stories to a checklist of details, you can totally miss the point. So how do we find real value then? Well, it's not about the surface stuff. It's in the story itself. Think about the Japanese art of kintsugi. It's a perfect example of this idea. A brand new bowl is just a bowl, but an heirloom, that carries generations of stories with it. So what happens when that heirloom shatters? Well, its story is definitely not over. The pieces are repaired with gold, honoring the damage. Those scars become part of its beauty. So its value isn't in being perfect. It's in its unique, restored story. You can find a really similar lesson in the old tale of Sir Gawain and the Loathly Lady. See, Gawain shows honor over appearance, promising to marry a hideous woman to save King Arthur. But his choice to let her choose, to give her sovereignty, is what breaks the curse completely. And this isn't just in old tales. Check out this incredible quote from a widower about his late wife. So maybe the problem isn't a lack of beauty, but, eyes that cannot see. Which leaves us with a final thought. Is true value found in what we see or in the stories we live?
Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're looking at a magic trick, one we've all fallen for.
You know, a lot of stories are just like a magic trick. They have three parts: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige.
So there's this story that the modern world is disenchanted. But what if that's the trick? See, we've kinda got enchantment all wrong. We think it's wonderful, but it used to mean being cursed.
So being disenchanted wasn't about losing magic. No, it was about breaking free from a curse.
Yeah, and this idea that the whole world was enchanted, that's a myth. Spells are personal, they hit people, places. The real fight here isn't science versus wonder, it's way bigger. It's truth versus the lie. The movie The Prestige shows this perfectly with its two magicians, Borden the skeptic and Angers the believer.
C.S. Lewis does the same thing in Narnia. You've got Aslan, who is truth, fighting Tosh, who is the lie.
And that's where true despair comes from, when you start to believe truth and lies are the same thing.
But the story also shows that any real good deed, well, that gets claimed by truth, no matter what.
Okay, so this isn't just some old myth. It happens today, in stories you'd never believe. Take this story. A boy named Nicholas felt like an outcast, so he left home to find his tribe.
There, he met a young man, Asa, who was just completely captivated, enchanted by Nicholas's song.
But Asa had a secret. He was actually born a girl, Eula, and had used a potion to change.
Then, after a near-death experience and a prayer, a voice, a message, started to change everything.
And here's the prestige. This isn't just a fairy tale. It's the true story of Nick and Lex Rennick.
Their real story, it involves detransition, a miraculous healing, and then having 2 kids. It's incredible. Their lives are proof that these old patterns, curses, transformation, redemption, they're still happening right now.
And the spells we're under today? They just look a little different, but they work the same way.
So you have to ask, are we seeing things clearly, or are we missing the spells right in front of us? So the real magic isn't about finding more wonder. It's about breaking the spells we're already under.
All right, let's explore our biggest dreams, and it all starts with a simple magic trick. It really boils down to this conflict, right? What we actually believe versus what we hope for. Take the movie The Prestige. A feud starts at a seance, revealing 2 clashing views on a hard truth. Borden, he was all about facing facts, but Angier just wanted illusions to quiet the fear. And what's so interesting is how Borden's skepticism totally mirrors this C.S. Lewis quote. To him, this new god of electricity was just a bigger lamp, another illusion he couldn't see past. But Angier's hope? It led him straight to a new prophet, the one and only Nikola Tesla. And here, Tesla's science literally invents a ghost, blurring the lines between magic and reality. This whole soul versus consciousness debate, it's the same dream Silicon Valley has today. It kind of reveals a core truth, right? Sci-fi dreams are often just religious quests in disguise. This hope evolves from a tent to a wagon to a ship, and finally, the starship. The starship is our greatest dream.
It's not just a ship, it's hope itself.
But there's a catch. To make starships work, sci-fi needs cheats like warp drives and wormholes.
See, here's the problem. You can have faster than light travel, or physics, you can't have both.
This wall has pushed fiction away from hard sci fi and right back towards fantasy and magic.
But what if the starship isn't the final symbol? After all, it's still just for exiles.
The Bible actually slips the script. It's not about us going to paradise, it's paradise coming to us. This city has 12 foundation gems, but for centuries, their selection was, well, a total mystery. Turns out, all 12 gems are anisotropic. They literally explode with color under polarized light. Wow. The city is also described as having streets of transparent gold. Sounds like fantasy, right? Well, remember transparent aluminum from Star Trek? That stuff's real now. Science is catching up.
Look, the point isn't scientific proof. It's that our imagination keeps pointing to the same place.
C.S. Lewis put it perfectly. If we desire what this world can't give, maybe we're made for another. So, what does the stream reveal? Maybe that science and faith are aiming for the very same star.
Okay, let's dive into a pretty bold claim that castles are actually greater than cathedrals.
So, the idea is that cathedrals can feel kind of alien, but castles, they feel like a living cosmos. The symbolism of a cathedral is compared to a dead language. It just doesn't really speak to us anymore. But a castle, that's a different story. It's seen as a living microcosm, a whole world in miniature. Think of it like a fractal. Each layer you go deeper holds more and more meaning. Yeah, a castle wasn't just stone walls. It was a place buzzing with all kinds of human life. And when things got bad, it became a refuge, a kind of stone ark protecting everyone inside. So this all leads to a huge question. How do we build things today that have that same living quality? Well, the source points us to architect Christopher Alexander and his idea of a timeless way of building. It's not about a certain style. It's about something he called a pattern language that works at every single scale. And this idea, it works at the grandest scale you can possibly imagine. He imagined a world broken into 1,000 small, independent, and culturally unique regions. But what's really cool is how it also works at the most intimate, tiny scales. Take a balcony, for instance. He had a pattern for it, and one detail was absolutely key. See, that 6-foot depth allows for a table and chairs. It allows for connection. Any less, and life just doesn't happen there. But is that it? Can a set of patterns, a process, be enough to create something that truly lives? Apparently not. There's something deeper, a central teaching he called the kernel of the way. And here it is, the real secret: you can only make something live if you're egoless. That living quality doesn't come from a calculated plan. It comes from forgetting yourself. To do it, the builder has to let go of all their images and just start with a void. And you can see how this goes way beyond just buildings, right? It applies to, well, everything. So it leaves you with this question. What image do you need to let go of to build something that lasts?
Let's dig into a pretty wild idea. What if all architecture is really just about marriage?
Yeah, that's the core thesis from our source. It's a huge claim, so let's unpack it. Okay, so here's how we'll break it down in 5 steps, from way back then to right now.
First up, a keyword you need to know, telos. It just means something's ultimate purpose.
And here's the kicker. When a culture loses that purpose, it starts to fall apart.
So for evidence, we'll start with the tabernacle of ancient Israel. It's a fascinating example.
See, the tabernacle wasn't just a temple. It was seen as a kind of cosmic wedding tent.
And you still see this today in the Jewish wedding canopy, the chuppah. It represents home.
You can really see the shift here, from raw, earthy rituals to more symbolic gestures.
Okay, so what happens when a society forgets all this? What's the consequence?
Well, their focus shifts away from homes and toward giant monuments of power and pleasure.
And the architecture itself? It basically tells the story of where everything went wrong. Think about the Egyptian pyramids. Their civilization died and took its secrets with it.
Or the Mayan ziggurats, which became places for mass human sacrifice. Really dark stuff.
And of course, the Roman Colosseums, the ultimate arenas for violent public entertainment.
But this isn't just ancient history. The source points to our own empty shopping malls. So these incredible architectural marvels, they're basically just tombstones of extinct cultures. Which brings us to today. What does our own architecture say about us right now?
Well, our housing trends are pretty telling, from huge luxury homes to gated retirement villages.
This focus on renting is part of a bigger trend, a whole lifestyle based on subscriptions.
New neighborhoods aren't really organic anymore. They're designed for specific types of consumers.
So, what are our pyramids today? What are we building that's truly massive?
Things like giant entertainment spheres, huge server farms, massive distribution centers. The source argues this focus on bigger and more spectacular buildings is a really bad sign.
So if what we build really shows what we value, what kind of future are we building?
Let's talk about housing. Is our obsession with the dream home hurting family life? Yeah, is chasing that perfect house actually stopping you from living the life you really want? Let's dig in.
You know the drill, right? Get the career, buy the house, then you can finally start a family.
But what if you flip that? The idea here is that need is a powerful motivator. Just start.
Because waiting for that perfect home can become a huge roadblock to what actually matters.
So what's the problem? It's this thing called the real estate cycle.
The source tells the story about a couple, Bob and Donna, who get trapped on this ladder.
And where do they end up? In a giant house, way bigger than they ever needed.
And get this, in a crazy twist, they bought back their first home just to tear it down.
So it really boils down to this. Is a house for making money, or is it for making a life?
Okay, so if the cycle is broken, how do we fix it? Well, there are a few ideas. A lot of these solutions start with family, using the resources we already have to help out.
But we can also think bigger, like rethinking how we design our communities from the ground up.
A key point is that the typical nuclear family is just too isolated to really thrive on its own.
So, the answer might be a mix of both, your own private space, plus shared community areas.
These models are all about affordability and real connection, not just isolation.
Look at the big difference here. The goal shifts from profit to community, from moving out to adding on.
The whole point is creating these chosen, extended families that actually support each other.
And that's the real takeaway here. If you prioritize human connection, the right housing will follow.
So what kind of future could we build if our homes were designed for connection, not just for profit?
Imagine a building with absolutely nothing to hide. We're diving into a new vision called the tectonic temple.
So believe it or not, it all started with this quote comparing art to a plumber.
And get this, the big aha moment happened right in a Walls parking lot. It was like suddenly one paragraph connected all these dots into a vision for a totally new building. So the big shift was this, thinking of art less like preaching and more like plumbing. Absolutely essential.
This led to thinking about the original cathedral builders. They were craftsmen, finding joy in their work.
Yeah, these were workmen, not priests. They were just providing for their families like any other craftsman.
And so, this vision gets a name, the Tectonic Temple, a building that shows you how it's made.
This completely flips the script. Instead of a cross shape, think of a human body, with its structure revealed.
And you know what? This whole building as a body idea is already happening in modern architecture.
Just think about it. The frame is the skeleton. Plumbing is circulation. Wiring is the nervous system. See?
So this temple would have no secrets. You'd actually see the beams, the pipes, the wiring, all of it.
The point is to celebrate all the work, even the parts that are usually hidden away from us.
This creates a totally different kind of awe, not of mystery, but of understanding how it all works.
Basically, the love, the struggle, the wisdom of the builders, it's not hidden. It's right there in the work.
So what you're really seeing is a story of human connection, a community building something together. But here's the thing. To build something this meaningful, you can't just copy old designs.
So it leads to a much bigger question. Before we build the cathedral, what do we have to build first?
The answer? It's not about materials. First, you have to build the people who can build them.
All right, let's get into a pretty wild idea about the future of architecture. Way back in the 19th century, this author basically predicted we'd grow our food in labs. And, we're kind of getting there with lab-grown meat, but not everyone's on board. But what if bioengineering's real future isn't about food, but our homes? I mean, think about it. Our very first homes were biological, like tents from animal skins. It's even thought these early tents were inspired by stuff like giant mammoth skeletons. So this gives us two big ideas, wearing a predator for its power or living inside a herd's protection. So, what if we could use those same biological parts, but without harming any animals? Yeah, imagine a house with roof tiles made from pangolin scales or siding from shark skin. But here's the catch, those parts lose their coolest feature. They can't heal themselves anymore. So, what's the solution? You bring the life source with the product. Make the house alive. This living home would need its own systems, right? Metabolic, circulatory, the whole deal. Now just imagine living in it. You'd have windows that blink open and shut like eyelids. The walls could feel warm and fuzzy to the touch, kind of like a kitten. You could just curl up and nap in a built-in nook, sort of like a kangaroo's pouch. And get this, the whole house could actually move, migrating with the seasons. Okay, but this whole idea raises some huge questions. Like, how would we even talk to it? Would this living house be a partner, or would it just be a really complex smart home? And that's the core conflict. Is the house an independent agent, or just a protective arena? This whole thing really scales down to our own bodies. We're just living tents for our microbiome. Maybe our fears about tech aren't about the tech at all, but about ourselves. So, what makes a home perfect? Is it the tech, or is it an act of mutual trust? How do you build something that lasts? Well, there are two very different ways to go about it. After the Great Flood, what was Noah's first move? Not building a fortress, he planted a vineyard. And that tells you everything, right? For him, real creation starts small, with something that can grow. But that's not the only way to build, is it? Some people choose sheer force over patient growth. So you can either work with the world as it is, or you can try to bend it to your will. Take King Herod. He was all about that second approach, literally moving mountains to show off his power. His fortress, Herodium? It was basically a giant monument built on fear and his own fragile ego. Now, Jesus saw this massive project and wasn't impressed. In fact, he kind of mocked that kind of power. He said faith, even as tiny as a mustard seed, could move a mountain. So what's that all about? And spoiler alert, it's not about magic tricks. It's something way more profound than that. It's about having total trust in the purpose planted inside you. Like a seed's DNA. A mustard seed's power isn't its tiny size, but the massive potential that's packed inside it. And for Jesus, that seed is the gospel, an idea designed to grow and completely change the world. There's an old prophecy about this, a stone seed that would topple man-made empires. See the difference? It's a kingdom that grows naturally, not one built by brute force like Herod's. So what does this big cosmic story mean for us, like right now? Well, it gets pretty personal. We're basically invited to stop being so impressed by mountain movers and start being gardeners instead. And the instructions, they're super practical. Build houses, plant gardens, and seek the good of your city. Each of those things, planting, building, seeking peace, is an act of faith in what's to come. So the big takeaway is this. You want to move a mountain? Go plant a seed. What's yours going to be? Let's explore a radical vision for cities. What if we could actually grow them from the ground up? You know that feeling, right? But what if that pull towards the country is actually biological? So check this out. A poll from 1972 found most Americans didn't really want to live in a city. Yeah, only 13% preferred the city. That was down from 22% just 6 years before. This suggests our need for green space isn't just a preference, it's actually hardwired into us. The way we build cities now, this urban sprawl, it just walls us off from what we really need. So how do we get both? Well, the solution might come from a simple pattern in nature itself. Picture the city and countryside woven together, kind of like interlocking fingers. It works on two simple rules. And these measurements are key. They mean you're never more than a 10-minute walk from the countryside. It's a brilliant design, right? It balances our social side with that deep need for nature we all have. But building this, well, it's slow and pricey. So what if we could grow a city instead? Okay, two very different stories about planting trees really show why the seed matters so much. I mean, we've been shaping plants forever, right? Think pruning, crafting, even creating living fences. We already have ways to get plants to grow into specific structures, like a living willow fence. But what if a house could come from a single seed? That's taking it to a whole new level. Think about it. The DNA in a seed is already a blueprint for super complex structures. So if we can tweak that genetic code, could we tell a tree to grow into a house? And we're not talking about a tree house. This is about a house that's a single living thing. So, could our future cities actually be planted, not built? What a thought. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into one fan's epic quest to find the soundtrack. So, imagine this. You're a pastor's son in the early 2000s. That's a real problem. His world taught him that rock music was dangerous, with scary VHS tapes to prove it. The safe stuff, Christian rock? Yeah, that just wasn't cutting it for him. So he dove into the bad stuff. Think Rage Against the Machine, even 90s rap. Then, friends introduced him to a local rock club. A whole new world opened up. And in this scene, melodic metalcore was king. That's how you earned your stripes. But here's the twist. Publicly, they were all hardcore. Privately, they loved emo. Yup, in their vans, these tough guys were belting out Dashboard Confessional. And in all this musical confusion, he found an album that just clicked. It was perfect. The album, The Moon is Down. It was from Chris Caraba's other band, Further Seems Forever. This discovery started a decade-long chase. The problem? The original singer was already gone. But he stuck with them, following the band through 2 whole new lead singers. And while the new stuff was good, it just wasn't the same. The band even broke up. Life went on. He was pretty much done with the whole concert scene, you know? But then, in 2010, the news dropped. An original lineup reunion tour was happening. April 29th, 2011, the Paradise in Boston. After 10 years, the wait was finally over. He finally got to sing along to those songs with the guy who actually wrote them. It's amazing how an album can define a chapter of your life. So what's yours?
Ever thought about how music isn't just background noise? It actually actively shapes who we are.
And we're not just talking about a good mood. The right song can literally point us towards, well, the good. So let's get into it. How does music work its magic? It's all about its power to transform us through story.
Okay, for example, just singing together. It connects us, lifts our spirits, and even helps with stress and pain.
You've seen this at concerts, right? That incredible, powerful feeling of thousands of people singing as one.
And because it's so loud, you can just belt it out. No judging you, it's totally freeing. But it's not just about community. Music also has a job to do, literally, with our work. I mean, you want that high-energy track at the gym, but in a quiet museum, yeah, not so much.
And this is nothing new. Think ancient rowers with drums or a radio blaring on a job site today. So, where do we see this power really clearly? Believe it or not, in country music. You know that person who says, I listen to everything, and then they pause, except country. But here's the thing, that divide isn't really about the sound. It's a reaction to its raw sincerity.
See, pop music often gives you a pure emotion. Country, on the other hand, wraps that same feeling in a story.
And that's the whole point, right? Taking one person's life and making it feel like your own. Which brings us back to the big idea, music's incredible power to transform us through narrative.
It's like the right song can be a mirror, helping you see your own life more clearly.
Let's look at a really powerful example. It's a song about a boy, his deer, and losing his innocence.
So the song kicks off by retelling the story from the classic novel, The Yearling.
But then it gets personal. The songwriter connects that story to his own. And it becomes this dialogue about a shared wound, the kind of grief you're not always supposed to show.
And that's it, right there. That's music's real magic. It gives us the stories we need to heal.
So it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What story is your playlist telling about you?
Your clothes are talking, but do you know what they're saying? Today, we're going to decode it.
Every single outfit tells a story. The real question is, does everyone hear the same one? Yeah, see, that's the problem.
The code's totally broken. One outfit can send 1,000 different messages.
I mean, check this out. Even trying to look sharp for work can get completely misinterpreted. It's wild.
So how do we make sense of all this chaos? We need to find a kind of pattern language.
Okay, so our source lays out 5 key ideas to get us started. Let's break them down.
First up is modesty. You could think of it like a wrapped gift that says, hey, not for you.
Adam and Eve's fig leaves? Well, that was their own attempt, but it just wasn't enough.
All right, next up, appearance. This is all about how clothes can totally change how people see you.
And look at this contrast. Jacob uses clothes to imitate, but Tamar uses them to conceal. So cool.
Number 3 is office. This is simply when your clothes are your uniform, showing everyone your role.
Right, like Joseph's famous coat. It wasn't just a fancy gift, it was basically his CEO uniform. Fourth, we've got utility. This one's easy. It's just clothes as a practical tool, right?
But what's interesting is how utility can be flipped. With sackcloth, being uncomfortable is the point.
And last but not least, identity. This isn't your job. It's about who you really are inside.
So here's the difference. Office is your external role, but identity is your internal reality. See?
So when you put it all together, you see clothing is never just fabric. It's communication. This doesn't give us a strict dress code. Instead, it's a new vocabulary for our modern world.
It really makes you think, right? When you got dressed today, what story did you decide to tell?
You probably think you know the story of Jacob and Esau, but what if it's really about both of them? So, you've got two brothers, total opposites, and their parents, they each had a favorite. And that family drama, it's the perfect setup for a deception that changes absolutely everything. Jacob, with his mom's help, pulls off this crazy, elaborate scheme to steal Esau's blessing. And it works. Their blind father, Isaac, falls for it and gives the blessing to the wrong son. Jacob runs for his life, but his story is far from over. This is just the beginning. And what happens? Well, the deceiver gets deceived. He's tricked into marrying the wrong woman. Talk about irony. Jacob ends up living the tough life that was actually meant for his brother. But while all this is happening to Jacob, something's changing in Esau's tier. It starts small. He just notices. He sees that his parents aren't happy with his choices. Then he starts to really listen, processing what his father told Jacob. And all that thinking leads to action. He decides to choose a more honorable path. Okay, fast forward 20 years. Jacob has to face Esau, and he is expecting the worst. But the night before, he rustles a mysterious stranger, and that changes everything for him. He's asked a simple question: what is your name? He has to face who he really is. And then his name is changed to Israel. He's no longer the trickster. He strives with God. And the meeting? No revenge, just forgiveness. Esau runs to him, and they weep together. This powerful reunion really gets to the heart of what it means to be chosen. You've probably heard this verse: Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Sounds pretty harsh, right? But if you look at the original language, hated here just means loved less. It's not about damnation. Esau wasn't rejected at all. He got his own blessing, his own land, he thrived. So the big idea here is that God choosing one person doesn't mean he's rejecting another. It makes you wonder, right? Who do we see as the main character, and who do we overlook? In the Bible, clothes aren't just clothes. They're actually a kind of symbolic language. Yeah, this language can show you someone's job, who they are, even their walk with God. So it really starts with priests and prophets. Their clothes were just packed with meaning. Just look at the high priest's outfit. It was a symbol for the entire nation of Israel. Or think about Elijah's mantle. It was so powerful, it was even used for miracles. But it wasn't just for the big guys. Clothing laws shaped everyone's identity. These rules were all about wholeness and truth, kind of showing off your rough edges. And these tassels, they were like a walking sign that you were part of the covenant. Okay, now let's talk kings. For them, their royal garments were basically their power. You had King Saul, who literally hid from his calling. Then David, chosen for his heart. Then you get Solomon, legendary for his glory. But it wasn't his robes, it was his buildings. And that just goes to show true glory wasn't about the clothes he was wearing. All of this symbolic language, it really comes together in one person, Jesus. And his garments are key. His crucifixion, it's like a twisted mock coronation. What's wild is that every step here is a direct inversion of a real coronation. The robe's color, the crown of thorns, it all ties right back into Israel's history. Then at the cross, they divide his clothes. It's a symbol of the kingdom's future division. But his tunic was seamless.
It couldn't be torn, a sign of unity for his church. After the resurrection, things shift. The apostles are told to be clothed with power. So, after all that symbolism, what if there's one last physical garment from all this? I'm talking about the Shroud of Turin, an ancient cloth with a faint image on it. The image looks like it was burned right into the fibers, some say by a burst of radiation. So, could this be the final witness? It's a wild thought, where faith meets physical evidence. All right, let's dive in and decode the hidden language of our clothes. We've kind of forgotten what our clothes are meant to symbolize, but our choices still say a lot. It's this idea that your clothes aren't just who you are, but who you want to become. So one of Jordan Peterson's unconventional suits recently ignited a huge debate online. And this put menswear critic Derek Guy right up against Peterson's very rule-breaking style. Guy's argument starts with that classic idea, you gotta know the rules to break them. He sees fashion as a kind of social language, with its own set of rules. And Guy listed all the specific rules Peterson's outfit broke, creating a weird formal mismatch. For Guy, it wasn't some masterful statement. It just showed a lack of understanding. Basically, Guy's take was, if you don't know the language, you can't really play with it. But what if Peterson is speaking a totally different language on another level entirely? To get it, we have to look somewhere pretty unexpected: Shakespeare. In The Taming of the Shrew, a character named Petruchio shows up to his wedding dressed wild. Yeah, a servant describes this completely shocking outfit designed to shatter every convention. See, it's not a mistake. It's actually a test to reveal the true character of others. And here's the point. Character is hard to change. Clothing, on the other hand, is easy. As Petruchio says himself, his bride is marrying him, not his outfit. This whole thing ties right back to that idea of aspirational dressing. So you can dress to fit in, to stand out, or to hold up a mirror to everyone else. It's all about context, right? A tux for moving furniture just doesn't work. So maybe the real question isn't about following the rules, but knowing your audience. So, Cody Rhodes finished his story at WrestleMania. But what if that big win wasn't the real main event? Okay, so the argument here is that Sunday's match was great, but Saturday was way more compelling. It sounds crazy, but the idea is that Cody's loss on Saturday meant more than his win on Sunday.
You gotta remember, his whole mission was to win the one title his legendary family could never get.
See, this was never just about winning matches. The Rhodes family fought corporate power for decades. And in the ring, you could see it plain as day: athletic underdogs versus absolute genetic freaks. But maybe the biggest performance all weekend, it came from the returning Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. To get his impact, you gotta know what a heel is. He's the bad guy. And The Rock went all in, becoming this corporate heel, the very thing Cody was fighting against. He played it perfectly. He became the living symbol of the power that held Cody's family down. But that's the thing, right? This is the same Rock fans have loved for years as a hero, which creates this awesome conflict because the hero, the babyface, is everything in a wrestling story. And a guy like Cody, a hero everyone loves, WWE's own Triple H says that's incredibly rare. Here's the problem, though. The champ, Roman Reigns, a lot of people just saw him as a poser. So beating a poser like that, it just wouldn't have been a satisfying end to Cody's huge story. So The Rock stepped in. He became the perfect villain, the one Cody needed to make him shine. But get this, the final twist wasn't decided by writers or wrestlers. It was decided by you, the fans. Which is just a crazy paradox, right? In a sport everyone knows is predetermined. The fans wanted Cody to win so badly, the company basically had no choice but to listen. So in the end, Cody didn't just win a belt for his dad. He won wrestling back for the fans. So it makes you wonder, if every hero needs a great villain, what does that say about us? Okay, let's dive into the surprising lessons hiding in this so-called fake sport. This is the first thing everyone says, right? But the answer is way more complicated than that. The author felt this huge gap between his meaningful but kind of dull work and the epic stories he loved. So he was looking for something to bridge that gap, a place where story became physically real. And the surprising answer he found? Professional wrestling, a space where story and physicality are one. So let's get back to that fake question. The way wrestling deals with it actually redefines skill itself.
Sure, the winner is decided beforehand for the story, but those hits and falls, they are 100% real.
So the real goal isn't just to win, it's to protect your opponent from getting seriously injured. Wrestlers train for years to take hits that look brutal but actually minimize any real damage. Look, anyone can celebrate a win, but it takes a true pro to know how to lose perfectly. And that's the key. A wrestler's value is tied to their skill, not their win-loss record. Think about it. To protect someone, you first have to know exactly how to hurt them and then choose not to. This is really the true meaning of meekness. It's not weakness, but incredible strength under perfect control. This quote perfectly captures that discipline. A wrestler knows how to cause harm, but chooses not to. Now, this all serves the story. And to tell that story, wrestling uses its own unique language. First up, you have the face. That's your hero, the good guy you're supposed to cheer for. On the other side, you've got the heel. He's the villain, there to make the hero look good. And then there's a crucial role, the jobber. This person's job is literally to lose and make others look good. This completely flips how you see the heroes. The author's hero was actually seen as unskilled by the pros. The reason? He only looked heroic because those hardworking jobbers made him look that way. So why would anyone actually choose to do this? To make themselves look like a loser? Because they're serving a greater good. They are serving the story itself. This reframes our idea of strength, success, and, what it really means to be a hero. Which leaves us with a final thought for you. Who are the jobbers in your world? All right, let's talk about something wild. What pro wrestling can teach us about the Bible. Sounds a little crazy, right? But stick with me. A few wrestling terms totally unlock these stories. Okay, first up, the lingo. In wrestling, the heel is the bad guy. Simple enough. And the Bible's first heel might just be Jacob, whose name literally means heel. I mean, the guy's whole story is full of heel moves, like stealing his brother's blessing. So, years later, Jacob finds himself in probably the most famous wrestling match in history. And his opponent, God, pulls a classic heel move, a dirty trick to dislocate Jacob's hip. And in that moment of defeat, Jacob owns who he is and gets a new name, Israel. Which brings us to another wrestling term, the carpenter. This is the guy who makes others look good. See, God was acting as a carpenter for Jacob, letting himself lose to build Jacob's character. And if you think about it, this carpenter idea perfectly describes Jesus and his disciples. But the biggest idea connecting all this is something called kayfabe. It's wrestling's big secret. Think Hulk Hogan. The character is real to us, not the actor Terry Bollea. That's kayfabe. But the best kayfabe isn't just a lie. It's taking something real and cranking it up to 11. And this isn't just for wrestling. The entire Roman Empire basically ran on kayfabe. Which brings us back to Jesus. He used this concept perfectly to manage his own story. He orchestrated the whole thing, creating confusion so he'd get arrested. It was scripted. Because if the powers that be knew the real plan, well, they never would have gone through with it. Okay, so the final lesson from all this is about legacy. It's about knowing how to lose. See, the greatest wrestlers know how to end their careers by passing the torch to a rising star. You see two paths. Dustin Rhodes owned a bad gimmick, while Bret Hart got bitter. Bret Hart himself said his bitterness was like carrying around a big bag of rocks. He had to drop it. And that's the thing. We can't control every circumstance, but we can control how we respond. So it makes you wonder, if our life is a story, how are we going to write our finish?
All right, let's get into the surprising science of what actually makes a great vacation. You know how it is, you plan, you save, but vacations can get so stressful, right?
Well, for this one couple, their idea of vacation couldn't have been more different. His childhood trips were all about pinching pennies. Hers, they were all about making memories.
So, to find some middle ground, he proposed a budget camping trip, a real challenge.
His solution was pretty ambitious. Build their own custom tent, a yurt, from scratch.
He used scrap lumber, a CNC router, and even zip ties. Super clever, modern workarounds.
And it worked! Even with a leaky roof on the last night, the trip was a huge success.
But here's the twist. The real discovery wasn't the trip. It was the months of prep.
Turns out, the effort, the work of getting ready, made the whole thing so much better.
It's kind of like Christmas, you know? The real magic isn't just happening on one day. It's all the work, finding gifts, decorating, planning parties. That's where the joy is. The secret sauce here is anticipation. That's what made the effort feel so meaningful. Now, this whole idea connects to something huge that we totally take for granted: the weekend.
So, where did the two-day weekend even come from? It's quite a story, actually.
It started back in 1908, got a big boost from Henry Ford, and became official in 1940.
Basically, our weekend is a mashup of religious needs and the good old labor movement. It lets everyone rest and worship how they see fit, which is a pretty big deal.
So the big takeaway? Meaningful rest isn't passive. You actually have to invest in it.
It makes you wonder, right? What if the best kind of rest actually takes the most work?
So you've probably heard of Passover, right? The feast that's all about remembering the past. But there's another huge feast, and this one is all about anticipating what's to come. It's called Sukkot, the Feast of Booths. So let's dive into this often forgotten celebration. It all went down in the 7th month, Tishri, right at the very end of the harvest. And because of that timing, it also got another name, the Feast of Ingathering. The main event was building these temporary booths, or sukkah, and actually living in them for a week. This was all to remember how God provided for Israel as they wandered through the wilderness. These booths were decked out with signs of abundance: fruit, palms, leaves for shade, and willows for water. And this celebration of abundance was on an absolutely massive scale. You gotta see these numbers. Over the 8 days, a whopping 71 bulls were brought for the feast. There were also 15 rams and 105 lambs. And yeah, all these sacrifices were meant to be eaten. It was a very literal invitation for everyone to taste and see that the Lord is good. Now, what's really fascinating about this party is who was on the guest list. Unlike other feasts, Sukkot was for absolutely everyone. Servants, foreigners, orphans, widows, all were welcome. And this radical inclusivity, it sets the stage for a really dramatic story in John's Gospel. His brothers wanted him to go big and public, but Jesus went in secret, like a sojourner. Then, halfway through, he just shows up in the temple and starts teaching, causing a huge stir. The tension just keeps building all the way to the final, quote, great day of the celebration. That's when Jesus stands and shouts this invitation, saying he's the source of living water. And here's the crucial point. This connects all the way back to the start of John's story. The word dwelt among us, but the original Greek word is much more specific: tabernacled. It's a perfect metaphor, God temporarily living with humanity right here in the person of Jesus. It suggests our ultimate home isn't some location, but a person who invites every single one of us in. The Apostle Paul, he's one of history's most debated figures, even within Judeo-Christian tradition. Seriously, some critics blame him for everything, even calling him Baal of Tarsus, a demonic god. So, what's the big deal with Paul? It all goes back to a huge debate in the early church. It was called the Gentile question. Basically, did new believers have to be circumcised to join? You had two sides. One said, yes, you have to follow the law. Paul and Peter said, nope, faith is enough. But here's the twist. It wasn't Paul who first welcomed uncircumcised Gentiles. It was actually Peter. Peter came to this conclusion after a wild vision that sent him to a Roman soldier named Cornelius. So, if Paul wasn't the first, what makes him so unique? The answer isn't just about theology. Turns out the answer might be hiding in plain sight, in his day job. Paul was a professional tent maker. That's right, he built temporary shelters for a living. And this connects perfectly to a specific Jewish feast, Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. So get this, maybe Paul wasn't just building physical tents, he was building a spiritual one. This wasn't a new idea. The prophets foretold a future kingdom centered on this exact feast. In Zechariah's vision, all surviving nations would come together to keep the Feast of Booths. This vision of incredible unity, it sounds exactly like Paul's famous declaration to the Galatians. He's describing a new kind of family where those old divisions just don't matter anymore. This whole idea is captured in a really neat theological concept, the already and the not yet. It means the kingdom is spiritually here now, in our hearts, but the full physical version is yet to come. And the feast itself perfectly mirrors this tension. 7 days in a temporary tent, looking to day 8. Okay, so what does this ancient vision have to do with us, right here, right now? Well, the source material proposes a really practical application, an ethos called tents before temples. It's about starting simple, building skills, and cultivating community, actually doing it. This whole practice builds resilience and generosity. It helps us prepare for whatever the future holds. Which leaves us with a final question. If we learn to live in tents, can we transform disaster into opportunity? Okay, let's dive into this really powerful story about changing your whole life. So, this one author, turning 40, felt like he was just trapped, locked in a prison of his own past. But one single discovery, man, it was about to unlock everything. He hit his 40th birthday and just felt like he was at rock bottom. So, what was it? Well, he reluctantly diagnosed himself, and it changed everything. He realized he was autistic, and suddenly decades of feeling different just made sense. This wasn't a problem, it was a revelation. His entire life just clicked into place. The past itself didn't change, right? But how he understood it was completely transformed. You know, he actually compared it to a key moment in the book, Dune. It was like his struggles weren't failures, but training for something powerful. And he also drew this really powerful parallel to the story of the man born blind. Those years of darkness, they weren't a punishment. They were preparing him for something amazing. And this quote just nails it. He went from feeling like a failure to an example of success. This got him thinking about a bigger idea, about the power of people on the margins. He saw two paths. You can fight the system and get crushed, or you can change the whole game. And you know, a lot of great minds might have succeeded by doing just that. It's because these outsiders, well, they just see things the rest of us can't. He calls this the Joseph principle. From the biblical story, that's a perfect example. Look at this. When Joseph fought directly, he lost. But when he changed the arena, he won. And just like Joseph, the author found healing not after the prison, but right inside it. And that's when his own prison doors started to open. A letter from his friends changed everything. What he saw as a lifetime of failure, they saw as a story of real contribution. So now he feels like he's been set free, and he has a totally new mission. His goal? To find others who are still trapped and help bring them into the light. So he leaves us with an invitation, really, to help build a world where everyone belongs.
It is very interesting to ask, what does one get out of literature